All right, Dad. Happy Friday. Today is August 30th. I'll start by just asking something that just been it's been on my mind. Um, if you asked this question 10 years ago, there would be
Uh,
no debate. The question is like, which country has the most powerful military in the world?
right.
And 10 years ago, you would have asked me, would have asked you, anybody in the world, the consensus would have been, well, of course, the United States. It's not even a competition. Do you think that's still the case now if you ask just let's say the majority of the people in the world, majority of countries? What is the consensus now? Have we already
Yeah.
entered into a new realm where it's like, oh, America's no longer top dog? Or are we still in this transitional phase?
I think probably most people would still answer that America has the largest or the most powerful military in the world. Now, separate question is which country, in fact, does have the most powerful military? There's perception and there's reality. I think the perception maybe is starting to change, but slowly. People who are watching or following the Russian-Ukraine war closely, I think, are probably adjusting their views of the relative strengths of the militaries, especially the Russian military versus NATO, which is largely the U.S. But most people don't follow the war closely. They just look at headlines. And if you're just looking at headlines, you would get the sense that Russia is pathetic, that it's continually getting its butt kicked. And I think that that's what certainly most Americans, at least within the English-speaking information space. Now, if you get out there, I think it's probably going to be different. There's going to be there are people in India, or just the global South or the global majority. They're going to be seeing something different, and they may be actually revising their estimates and beginning um, to realize that the U.S. is something of a paper tiger. But within the English speaking information space, I think there probably hasn't been much of a change at all. Again, maybe just there's that select few that's following things very closely, but most people don't. I'll just give you, because um, the the English speaking media really does a very good job of spinning things in a way and covering up things that that would expose the weakness of the American military. And just to give you just a very recent example, there was apparently an F-16 was shot down. Now we have three different stories about that. It was either destroyed by a Russian drone after it landed at an air base, or it was shot down by a Patriot missile, or it crashed. Now the official story, that you hear in the English speaking media is it crashed, but it almost seems certain that it was one of the other two. I don't know which one it was. It was a Ukrainian, actually, an Ukrainian RADA member that said it was shot down by a Patriot missile.
That's what I heard as well. Yeah,
Yeah,
that.
and I think maybe that's the most likely. But when and a U.S. Defense Department spokesman was asked about this directly. Yes, what happened? Was it shot down by a Patriot missile? And the person did not give a straight answer. He said, "Oh well, I think you need to ask the Ukrainians about that." Deflected. But just the fact that there wasn't an outright denial, makes me strongly suspect that in fact it was a Patriot. But that's the sort of thing that you're not going to get any Pentagon spokesman to say openly, because it reflects badly on the power, and this is a key weapon system of the U.S. military. It's one of the crown jewels of the U.S. military, and it's something, as we've said, that's very important in maintaining alliances. As part of the deal, say, okay, you're part of our team, right? When speaking of Saudi Arabia or whatever, and as a member of our team, we can protect you. We can protect your airspace with the state-of-the-art air defense system, the Patriot. And if it turns out the Patriot isn't nearly as good as it's said to be, well, that actually is a real blow, not just to U.S. prestige, but just to the ability of the U.S. government to make to make deals and maintain alliances with other countries around the world. So you know that they're going to hide weaknesses about it. And I think, again, this is just one example, but it's typical. I mean, the weaknesses in the of the U.S. military are downplayed or just plain hidden, and then all kinds of stories are fabricated about the Russians, or Russian failures are exaggerated and given the spotlight. So somebody, again, who's in the, consumes English language media, doesn't pay close attention, would get this assumption that, there's no reason to think that we're anything but number one. Again, it's a different story in the rest of the world, who hears a lot, of what's going on. Here's, I think, has a more complete picture of the actual war as it's being fought.
So that F-16 that was shot down, is that really that damning about the U.S. Patriot missile system? Because if it was shot down by a Patriot interceptor, because that's what I heard, and like you said, it was actually a Ukrainian RADA member that said that. They have every reason to lie the other way. So
right.
The fact that they said it makes it seem like, and it makes sense. So what my understanding was that to intercept incoming Russian missiles, they sent the F-16 to intercept some of these with the, using the Sidewinder missiles on the F-16.
Right.
And then the Patriot missiles are also being used to try to take down these Ukrainian incoming missiles. And wouldn't it just be that it's not really a fault of the Patriot missile system, it's the fault of whoever was operating it accidentally targeted this F-16 aircraft in it? If anything, it shows that the Patriot system worked. It brought down the F-16.
No,
but...
right. Well, no. I mean, it would be obviously there was a fault. This was not a story that you want to trumpet. This is a failure of the system.
Okay, yeah, not trumpet, but
yeah.
Of course, but is it a failure of the system or a failure of whoever was operating it?
Okay, well, we really don't know. Part of the Patriot system is supposed to be able to differentiate between friend and foe.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's actually a friend and foe identification system. Now, we don't know. That obviously broke down. Now, was it a fault on the Patriot side, or was it, or maybe the fault was on the F-16 side? It's got to be one or the other, and we don't know. But either way, it just kind of does cast doubt on the the efficacy of the system, because who wants to buy a system that ends up shooting down your own aircraft?
Right. And the other alternative story that is that it crashed, which also looks bad on just the F-16. If it just crashed, this pilot that died in the crash, I think he was really the face of kind of this F-16 program, from my understanding, that he went through years of training, and they finally arrived. I mean, it's kind of, it's tragic as well. I mean,
yeah, sure.
But it's also.
But it was also rather predictable.
Right, exactly.
These are going to be shot down.
Right.
There's no reason to think.
Time.
Right. There are all these, Soviet era aircraft that have been shot down. Those were good airplanes. They're about as old as this F-16. There's no reason to assume the F-16 is far superior. They all got shot down. Not right away, but over the course of the war, every last one of them got shot down. And we can expect the same with the F-16s, maybe with some help from the Patriot systems. We don't know.
Right.
I mean, occasionally, let's be honest. We got to be honest that even the best systems sometimes make mistakes. Air defense is a very tricky, very challenging military task, you can say, and. They don't shoot down all incoming missiles, and sometimes there are mistakes, failures to differentiate between friend and foe. So if this isn't necessarily damning. That's the accidents like that can happen on the Russian side, but they should be very minimal, right? It should not be a common occurrence. And the thing is, this was like the first F-16 in the air. They had just begun to put them into operation. So it's either very bad luck or there is some sort of defect in the system.
Okay, well, going back to my original question, you say that, within the Anglosphere, people that are reading English media or associated with, the Western Europe, they probably still have the idea that the U.S. is number one. But if we're just talking about a global consensus, the global majority, do you think the average person living in Brazil or China or India, do they still have that perception? I mean, there's the power of U.S. culture and movies. I
Yeah.
mean, Top
Right.
Gun just came out, last year and made box office hit. I'm
Yeah.
sure a lot of people around the world saw that, and
Right.
that I think really
Yeah.
helps
Yeah.
boost
No,
American prestige.
I think probably, yeah. I mean, when you leave the Anglosphere, and we're talking about media and the rest of the world, I think it's going to be it doesn't say the U.S. narrative, the Western narrative doesn't have the same kind of hegemony there. It's not hegemonic the way it is in the Anglosphere, but it still has influence. It's it is very powerful, and it even affects to some extent people in Russia. There's still people who are or in Iran, struck. Those people are becoming increasingly rare in both countries, but there used to be a sizable fraction of the population in places like Iran and Russia and I'm sure in China too that really did believe in consumed Western media and really believed in it. Now that is just over time, just because of the various events that have occurred over the last several years, and especially during the last couple of years, those people have become rarer and rarer. So people that really totally buy into the Western narrative are becoming a rare species, or rarer species, let's say, outside of the Anglosphere. And but they're still there. And in any case, there still is influence. It's just because we really are so good at the information war. Everybody admits, even like the most the most enthusiastic supporter of Russia will still admit that the Ukrainians are really better at information war. They have teams. It seems like the Russians are really kind of flat-footed when it comes to that. They just don't seem to have an interest in playing that game. And again, maybe in the long run, I think in the long run, it'll serve them well. It's just like, in the end, they win the war, and then everybody will forget about the information war and kind of realize that they had just been had. It was a con game and they lost. But in the meantime, the Ukrainians can and NATO can constantly pat themselves on the back over their information war successes.
Right. Well, I understand that, people living in the global south, just most people in general, don't have the amount of time like you and I, where we spend hours consuming information about what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, in the Middle East every single day. We're a bit more plugged in than the average person.
Right.
But the more important question is, do these governments around the world have realized this? Because that's really what matters. And they obviously, foreign state departments in for other countries, these people that are in charge of foreign affairs or whatever, every single government has to be looking at this conflict closely and rearranging, their whole sort of global geopolitical strategy based on what they're seeing. And they have to be coming to the same conclusions we are.
Right. You would hope so. I mean, there's certainly, it's just like we've seen, I think we've discussed earlier, unfortunately, a lot of these government agencies whose job it is really, like intelligence agencies or defense agencies, their job is to collect true data, process it, analyze it honestly, and, just present an honest assessment or picture to to political leaders. But that doesn't always happen. What we've seen, like within U.S. Intelligence agencies and within the U.S. Defense Department, we see that there's a certain kind of creature that rises to the top, and that's the political animal. The one he's not concerned about actually, giving realistic reports or reporting the reality, but just he knows what his political masters want to hear, and he tells them that. And I don't know how far this is obviously corruption. It's a corruption of public institutions that cease to serve the purposes for which they were created, and have just become, could say, have become simply tools of the political class. Now, I don't know how far that rot has gone in different countries. So, uh,
Well,
but I think probably, even so, the certain amount of reality gets through, and you can see it. I mean, even in notice in recent assessments, like following this Kursk incursion, there have been a lot. I'm really struck by the difference. There have been a lot of articles that have come out in the U.S. and even in Britain to some extent that say, this was a serious mistake by the Ukrainians. They never used to say those kind of things. They were just always, working hard to spin whatever the Ukrainians were doing, like the summer offensive of 2023. It was clear from the start that thing was a failure, and towards the end, you got sort of a grudging acknowledgement that it didn't quite work out the way it was supposed to. But that was very much the exception to the rule. I mean, throughout, you just had a lot of efforts to give it a positive spin. I don't see that now. So there does seem like, again, coming from these agencies, because a lot of these articles are actually just reflections, even when they appear in independent newspapers, supposedly independent newspapers, they in fact are just conveying what certain people anyway within intelligence and defense agencies are saying and thinking. So it shows that there is maybe a growing realism even within the Western agencies. So I think, there's no question about it, just among people who follow these things closely, and that's certainly going to be analysts in intelligence and defense agencies around the world. There's probably a much greater awareness of what's happening and acknowledgement. There have been articles that have come out, and actually, starting several months ago, like acknowledging that the various wonder weapons that the U.S. has introduced, starting with the HIMARS and going on to ATACMS and so on and so forth, that all of them have failed and been neutralized by the Russians. And that is big news. That's something like ahead of time we thought, okay, man, this will do it. This will turn the tide. This is a silver bullet. But then very quickly, I mean, it's actually quite remarkable how quickly the Russians adapted, figured these weapons out, and it just neutralized. So you don't even hear about them anymore. And that's got to be quite a blow. It's got to be quite a shock to the American defense establishment and other defense establishments around the world that are following this. They say, wait a second, HIMARS is worthless if you're going to fight somebody who's got Russian EWR. ATACMS is worthless. These small diameter glide bombs are worthless. These $100,000 artillery shells that are GPS guided are completely worthless. Before you're willing to you're going to fork over. You just think about it. You buy 10 of these, it's $1 million, right? You buy 1,000, it's $100 million. But now, are you going to spend $100 million for shells that are just completely worthless? You're not. So that's a huge blow to the military industrial complex in the U.S. That was something that ahead of time these different governments were paying that money. Now, I can't see anybody forking over that money now if they know they're going to deal with somebody who has access to Russian EW.
Right. Yeah, I mean, really, my question is directed to non-NATO member countries. So obviously, if you're part of NATO and you're using all the systems, you're part of this U.S. military-industrial complex. You have to keep that propaganda war because you need to keep the military sales going. You got this current war going, and the fact that they're starting to acknowledge that, okay, maybe the Kursk incursion was a mistake, I think is actually just more of a way to shift blame. Like, this isn't really the fault of NATO or NATO military equipment. This is the Ukrainians just being silly. And because, like you said, these analysts, the number one job is the propaganda in the beginning, and they're political animals. But at some point, when reality gets right in their face, like it is now, we're approaching the end game in Ukraine. I think they are having to they're needing to, and when in the end game means we're losing. I think it just ends up shifting into the blame game is what's going to happen, and it's going to be increasingly.
Exactly. So, like when you're right when you're talking about the incursion, for example, you say, it was a bad decision, but we don't know. Who knows? It may have been that the U.S. who came up with the idea
Yeah,
or
it
something.
might have been
We
our
don't even
decision.
know. Right. It could have been. We don't know exactly how the decision-making process worked. But
I
there's
mean,
no question there was some U.S. involvement. But anyway, yeah, now they're blaming the Ukrainians for doing this. But they're not talking about some other failures. Again, the technical failures. I mean, they did go in actually using some pretty powerful NATO EW equipment that initially was very effective, but it didn't take too long for the Russians to take it out. And then the Russians had actually a solution, at first they were able to pretty much completely incapacitate, neutralize all Russian FPV drones. But the Russians just started pulling something else out of their boxes, and that was the something that they've just started mass producing, and it's an FPV drone that is attached to an optical cable that's something like 3 miles long, and so it's completely impervious to electronic warfare. And so it was just after the first few days was a mess. The incursion was, really did catch the Russians by surprise, and it was a very well organized, very well planned incursion. But then when the Russians started to organize themselves and began to move in forces, they did have the tools to deal with this. So again, this EW that was initially very effective, that was neutralized. They just had the FPVs with the optical cables. Again, you don't hear much about that because, again, I think it reflects badly on our own MIC. It just shows that it's far from invulnerable. That the Russians have come up with solutions to a lot of our own systems, state of the art systems.
right. Yeah, just so if anybody's listening, EW is electronic warfare. MIC, military industrial complex. I think most people know that, but I think
Sure, yeah.
we need to make sure we mention sometimes what these acronyms or initialisms are, because I think some people may not aren't in the weeds with this as we are. Right. Okay, well then I'm still going back to the original question.
Okay,
then.
all right.
So
We'll
the original question though is just the other countries. Do other countries think that the United States is the most powerful military in the world? I'm not talking about NATO. NATO needs to try to pretend and admit and push out the propaganda. But I'm talking about the rest of the world. I'm talking about Africa. I'm talking about Asia, South America. I don't. I mean. I guess maybe I'm going to answer myself. I think a sign of it is just BRICS plus. People that are lining up for BRICS are basically acknowledging that, hey, the U.S. doesn't have a military monopoly or an economic monopoly anymore. The Russian economic warfare failed, and they're watching what's happening right now in Ukraine and Russia and realizing that, hey, Russia is winning, and a lot of these wonder weapons that the U.S. has been selling at these arms expos all around the world looked really great and really fancy and had all these bells and whistles and huge price tags, but they're just getting blown up over there in Ukraine, and they're not getting the job done that they were supposed to do. So I would say that the majority of the world, in terms of world governments, have probably come to the conclusion that the United States is no longer the most powerful military in the world. That's what I believe. But I don't know if you have come to the same conclusion.
Yeah, well, actually, I'll have a simple answer for you. I don't know. I mean, that's such a big question. I guess I would like to see some sort of hard data on it. So, yeah, I've been going at it from a lot of different directions, but the big answer is I really don't know. I think there's no, I don't know myself, really who has the most powerful military. It's because we're talking about, not just ground forces, but, the Air Force and naval forces. The U.S. Navy is very large. I guess in terms of tonnage, it's the largest Navy in the world. Now, I think that recently the Chinese surpassed them in the total number of vessels. And then Russia's Navy is much smaller. Russia is a land power, and but they do have a very, very good submarine fleet. And I think that's smart. It seems silly to me. I don't even know why the Chinese bothered to build some aircraft carriers. It just seems like that's just a way to lose $10 billion or whatever. I imagine the Chinese can do it for much cheaper than $10 billion.
Yeah, they just like to build things.
Yeah, right. They just might as well throw in an aircraft carrier, right? Just give these people busy at the port over here because, but yeah, I think there's no question again that like the U.S. Navy is more powerful, but as we've been saying, I think navies have become increasingly
obsolete.
Yeah, obsolete. Yeah, and say, okay, I think most people, I haven't heard any, most assessments I hear, including from people who are quite favorably disposed to Russia, say that, the U.S. Air Force is still the largest in the world. But everybody, virtually anybody who knows anything, also admits that Russia has the best air defense in the world. And I think they've really demonstrated that, during this conflict. Again and again, Ukraine has fired, maybe 12 ATACMS or sent, 50 drones. And again, the Russians will just shoot them, knock them all down with, either their electronic warfare, EW, or with air defense missiles. And knock them all down. It's just like, occasionally, which everybody understands, occasionally something gets through and occasionally can do some real damage. But it's a very, very low success rate on the part of the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians are not doing this on their own. You got to understand, right? They're doing this with a tremendous amount of help from the Americans, that are providing them with the satellite GPS data and actually in many cases, like working out some route, like, after carefully analyzing the Russian air defense network, they maybe notice there are a couple of vulnerable points and they'll therefore program the drone or the cruise missile to take some kind of circuitous route and snake its way through and around and come around from behind. And, occasionally they succeed doing that. But they're using actually the most sophisticated equipment and data to accomplish these. And they're only succeeding very rarely. So, yeah, I say, okay, well, maybe the U.S. does have the most powerful air force in the world, but so what? I mean, that can be neutralized by Russia's best air defense system in the world, and then, even the Americans are starting to realize, even sort of these. I've looked at these some mainstream pieces that are very clearly pro-Ukrainian. You see some acknowledgement that the Russians, they actually have a stronger army than when this started. They've learned a lot. They've adapted. They've recruited a lot of new soldiers, and they have combat experience. It's something that combat experience against a near peer adversary. That's something that the U.S. does not have, and I think that's extremely valuable. So, looking at it, ground forces, I think Russia probably does have the best army in the world now. Almost certainly does. And then China, China's got tremendous wealth and manufacturing capability, so it can churn out a lot of good arms. And I'm sure it's learned a lot from the Russians. I don't think there's any question that the Russians are, passing on some very valuable information to the Chinese military, like how to neutralize ATACMS, how to neutralize HIMARS. And but one thing that China does not have, in spite of having a huge population and having this huge manufacturing capacity, it doesn't have combat experience. The last time the Chinese fought was in 1979 in a very limited war in Vietnam. And, that could prove to be a real weakness.
Right. Well, the combination of Russia and China, though, is just such a juggernaut. I mean,
That's true.
You got Russia's combat experience, plus their advanced, the best missile defense systems, air defense systems, the best hypersonic missiles in the world, the most advanced electronic warfare in the world, coupled with China's incredible manufacturing capacity. It produces 90% of the drones in the world. Plus, it has the most people in the world. It's got over 1.4 billion people.
Or the second most.
Is India passed?
Yeah, India has surpassed.
Okay, well,
China
the
population.
thing is, even in India, India used to always be kind of more of a partner with the United States. Always used to be geared towards the West, but really that's changed now thanks to what's been happening with this BRICS Plus, and just the U.S. trying to force everybody to sanction Russia and go along with this. India said no, and now India is orienting itself towards Russia and China, which is, there's always been kind of these disputes between China and India, a few border disputes, and there's always been tensions, but it seems like that's being squashed.
Yeah.
One thing that's coming out of everything that the U.S. is doing is it seems like we are causing these sort of old ancient conflicts around the world to be resolved, and they come together. For an example is the Shiites and the Sunnis. Ismail Haniyeh, who was assassinated in Tehran. Iran is a Shia power, and the Shiites and the Sunnis have been killing each other for a long time, but now you have a Sunni leader that goes to Iran, a Shiite power, and is assassinated there, and you have this sort of this brotherhood between Sunni and Shias forming. Right. You had China get that peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia, the largest Sunni power, against Iran, the largest Shia power. Yeah. So it's interesting to see how we're kind of creating, everybody's like, well, one thing we all agree is we're getting pretty annoyed with America trying to boss us around, and so they're coming together. It's becoming clear that there's this very, very, very powerful Asian bloc now. Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to harp on this question one last time.
Okay.
And ask you, so we can't say for sure which country has the most powerful military. If I was guessing, I would say China, just because of its manufacturing capacity and its relationship with Russia. But I think maybe a better question would be, can you tell us, recap in your own words, why you think that the United States is no longer the most powerful military in the world?
Yeah, I guess I would say, okay, this is something that I've brought up a few times, but this war has caused me to reassess the power, the military power of the United States. Again, when this war began in February of 2022, there were some very, you could say, knowledgeable pundits, that pointed out, again, the great disparity in economic power, apparent economic power, let's say nominal economic power, between NATO on the one side and Russia on the other. And then especially if you look at military spending. Again, I think we mentioned in the last program that approximately 75% of all military spending in the world is done by NATO. And then most of that is the U.S. The U.S. is close to 50% of all military spending in the world. Now, Russia is just a small fraction of that. I don't know what it is right now. They're now spending 6% of their GDP. But I remember looking at just like, for example, the manufacturing capacities of Germany and the U.S. combined, and that's not all of NATO, of course. But those are the two biggest economies, among the NATO cons. If you add their manufacturing capacities as measured, I think according to GDP, it ends up being 15 times that of Russia. So I was aware of this disparity, and I was just thinking, if the Russians don't achieve a rapid victory, it's over again, because in the end, any kind of military strength rests on economic strength. If you don't have the economic base, your military, sometimes you can punch above your weight. It's for whatever reason, you may be, it may be able to do more than what would be expected for a country of let's say your economic strength, that is, say, your GDP. But so I was just thinking, 1/15, that, this isn't going to last long. You say, even if the Russians have an advantage in the initial stage, surely the other side will start cranking up production, and then it's just going to overwhelm. But we haven't seen that. In fact, we've seen the reverse. And I'll be honest, it was a real surprise to me, and I think it's a surprise to a lot of people. And then I guess I was been affected by maybe the price tag, and all the, maybe the Hollywood movies, but just the in general kind of the, uh, I remember the, the footage that we got from even going back to the first Gulf War, the U.S. wonder weapons, and that was from a good 30 years ago or more, and so I've just assumed that we had the best of the best because we just spent the most money, and now those wonder weapons like the Patriot system, they've been sent to Ukraine. Everything from the Abrams tanks to Patriots, to ATACMS, to we started off with the Javelin, and the fact is that again and again they've just come up short. So yeah, it's just that we really are a paper tiger. I mean, it's just something that I've come to realize. It's that huge price tag. A price tag is one thing, but the reality is another thing. It's just that we had a much bigger price tag than the other side. But it looks like the other side can crank out the weapons that are really needed to win a war. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. I mean, kind of.
Well, yeah, it does. And I guess just another big thing that I learned, like I said, this wasn't anything that I ever even considered. When I grew up, it was always America's number one by miles. Like we were just the biggest, baddest dude on the block, and it wasn't even close. And then I learned through you, and then started doing my own research. But one of the big things that came to my attention was just like, hey, the U.S., we don't have hypersonic missiles, and just how important missile technology is in modern warfare, because it comes down to air defense systems, and hypersonic missiles are the only things that can surpass any air defense systems, and the U.S. doesn't have them. And then I found out China has them, Iran has them, North Korea probably has them, and Russia has them.
Yeah, there's some question about, I guess like hypersonic can be defined variously. So there's still some question about whether Iran has true hypersonic missiles. They have missiles that do have, let's say, hypersonic reentry vehicles. I think that's that's the final stage, of the missile. And that final stage can achieve hypersonic speeds. And I think that some of those, I'm not sure, I've heard different versions, different stories. I think some of them may have been used in the demonstration attack in early April. Others say that actually they held back on those. Who knows? But yeah, there's no question that Russia's had them since 2018, 2019. And I've been hearing, I remember when it first came, that Putin announced that they had these weapons. They had some sort of kind of maybe not exactly a trailer, but a promotional, let's say just an advertisement that the Russian military put out, but it just wasn't Hollywood quality, and it just got all kinds of laughs and jeers. But again, this is typical. Okay, the Russians are not very good at this part of it, but they really did produce them, and we're finding out. It's actually at the very beginning of the war that they used their first Kinjal, and it took out a base very close to the Polish border where a bunch of mercenaries had congregated, and that was like it was the first warning shot. Like, this is the kind of war that you're going to be fighting. But again, from I think approximately 2018, the Americans have been working, and they keep on failing. I think maybe they're right on the verge of finally developing their own hypersonic system, but look, that's 6 years behind, and that's just going to be one system.
Right, the Russians have many different types of hypersonic missiles. Some that can go up to Mach 30.
Right.
It's and the Chinese have them as well. It's just, the more that this war has exposed so much to me personally, and I know to you as well, and I think just to anybody that's watching and paying attention. That's why I asked this question, because I know if I'm just being a rational actor, like I don't want Russia to be the most powerful military. I don't want Russia to be number one. I'm an American. I'm a patriot. I still love my country, even though I think it's gone off the track and its foreign policy is insane and is bringing this country down. But I'm not relishing in the fact that our military is garbage. But it needs to be made apparent to people that it's a corrupt system. We are throwing away trillions of dollars. What our military annual budget's close to $1 trillion on this, and we just keep on borrowing it. This is our money. I'm an American. This is our money, and you're just wasting it. If you're putting in that much money in there, I want to see results. And what this war has shown is that we're not getting results we're not getting any bang for our buck. And and I think the MIC is going, after this war is over, I don't know if there's any coming back from it. Like you said, the U.S. hegemony we're able to preserve U.S. hegemony through two things. And that's from the U.S. financial system, the SWIFT system, the U.S. dollar is the reserve currency. Well, that's gone out the window thanks to all these economic sanctions we placed on Russia. We gave them all the barrels we have, kept on blasting it. Now Russia's economy is stronger than ever, and people like that, like you've mentioned that before. That was something that the whole world saw, and it just changed everything.
I think,
and then,
right. That one is real clear. I mean, the economic warfare, it's just clear that the Russians won. Yeah, the U.S. very confidently, and the EU very stupidly went along with the U.S. plan to destroy the Russian economy. And just look, I remember, Ursula von der Haven this is something that Alex Christoforou brings up time and time again, in tatters. In other words, she was speaking about the Russian economy, that these sanctions would leave it in tatters. Now, I just came back from Russia yesterday, and again and again, all around you see signs of prosperity and growth. I was struck by the number of cranes, construction. There's new constructions everywhere. And then the old historic buildings are constantly being repaired. This is not a city that is getting run down, but it's just everywhere. They're expanding and they're improving and they're
revitalized.
Yeah, it's very clear. There's just the signs of prosperity everywhere. And they're doing that, while waging a war. And doing that in spite of these killer sanctions that were the sanctions from hell, the sanctions that were just supposed to destroy Russia. And I think it's clear that the Americans thought they really were, and then the Europeans stupidly, believed the Americans, and the whole world saw this. They know what the West attempted to do, and it was such a failure that that's really stark. Now, with the war, because it is, let's be honest, I think there's no question that the Russians are winning, and they're winning, every day they're getting stronger, and every day the Ukrainians are getting weaker, and we're starting to see the beginnings of a collapse right now. But it has been a slow-moving war. So people, again, who are not following it closely just are, left with a kind of a more of an indistinct impression about, relative military strengths. But with the economic, it's just clear. And so I think that explains a lot of the interest in BRICS. They saw, hey, Russia, they tried to bring down Russia and they couldn't. And hey, I think I want to be, and they're going after China now. And I think I want to be a part of this club. It looks like the winning club,
Right. Another thing that's just so frustrating watching Western leadership and Western foreign policy play out is they just keep doubling down on bad decisions. When it doesn't work, they just do it again. Every month they're rolling out another round economic sanctions.
Right.
And then on top of that, they froze $300 billion worth of Russian assets, just stole it, which everybody around the world that is holding, part of the Western financial system holding dollars is like, well, apparently the United States can just steal your money if you do something they don't like. The foundation of our might is based on the fact that we're supposed to be the world reserve currency that is impartial, that is apolitical. This is a monetary system that's apolitical, that people can engage in free commerce as they see fit, and we're not going to just steal your money. And I think yesterday or 2 days ago, I saw the EU Borrell announced that they're going to be confiscating the $1.5 billion of interest from the Russian assets and using it to finance the Ukraine war. It's insane. It's like, what are you doing? You're not hurting. You're not hurting Russia. You're hurting yourself. Yeah. We just have it's just so much self-inflicted damage. And it just amazes me. It's like these are supposed to be smart people. I'm sure they are in their own regards, but it's amazing how they can get so tunnel visioned or just so part of like we have to be with the program that they just keep going forward, even though it doesn't take a genius to step back and say, hey, this isn't working. It's actually hurting you. The inflation's getting worse in Europe. Energy prices are going up in Europe. The people are dollar reserves around the world are dropping. There's a new system being forwarded, the BRICS Plus. They're talking about making the whole new monetary infrastructure to no longer to abandon the U.S. dollar system. Just stop. Just guys, just stop and think about it. And if you want to preserve your own might and your own hegemony, then stop, shooting yourself in the face with these economic decisions. I just can't wrap my head around it. And okay, so clearly the economic warfare, I think, has changed the world. And this is the thing is this has just happened in 2 years. So I understand why a lot of people that aren't paying attention don't realize how monumental this is, because it takes a while for these global paradigm shifts to go into effect, and then people realize, wait, wake up one morning like, the world's different now. Can't quite put my finger on it.
Right.
But
well, again, if you're within the Anglosphere and you're consuming mainstream media, you really, if you're not the person who stops and really thinks hard about it, you probably haven't realized what's happened, even in the economic war, because it's been largely downplayed to a great extent. Russia's success. It does come through. I mean, if you search, and especially in some of the more serious highbrow magazines, you will find acknowledgments of the failure of the sanctions and the success of the Russian economy. But it's always in an article where there's a lot of spin and a lot of smoke, and if you're not really disciplined and trying to pull out the most important facts, you can go through that article. Maybe you got that fact somewhere, but then there will be all kinds of other things, and at the end you feel, yeah, but we're still simply the best. And Russia, maybe they got their economy is doing right now, but it's on the verge of collapse, just like the Chinese economy, which has been on the verge of collapse for the last 25 years apparently.
Right. It's as someone that lived in China for 10 years in Shanghai, it's not collapsing anytime soon. But okay, so we have the economic warfare, but then that's the largest pillar of U.S. hegemony was the ability to sanction countries and destroy them, to have this financial might, to have the dollar system. That pillar, it's down, it's chopped. The other remaining pillar is the U.S. military might to preserve U.S. hegemony, to say that the U.S. rules the world. And in my opinion, that pillar's gone too.
Yeah,
I mean,
the
Ukraine war has brought down both of these. Okay, to a large, maybe not 100%, but it's greatly diminished. Okay, we can at least agree with that. I think, and if it's greatly diminished, then in a sense that it's no longer a supporting pillar of the U.S. hegemony. Like it's gone. I just think people need to realize that, and I've come to that realization. Cope with it however you want to cope with it, but the U.S. empire is declining, and people feel it in their bones. But it's over, and there's no turning it around. So what we have to do is we have to integrate in part of this new world, which is a better world. It's a multipolar world. We don't want to have to be up there at the top trying to kick everybody down that doesn't want to go along with the U.S. system. As long as they're not bothering you and invading you and causing harm, then it's fine. It will be better. Think of what benefit has the average American citizen really gotten from having the largest military in the world? Going around wasting all this money. What it's gotten us is $35 trillion of debt, and it's got a lot of people around the world that hate us. Hasn't been a good thing. I'm not, not saying it's not important for countries to have a strong military, but have one that stays in your country and protects your country and helps your country. why are we gallivanting around in Southeast Asia or in the Middle East and bombing in countries Americans can't tell you anything about?
Right. Yeah.
And one of the things
Yeah.
I hate
Again, right. And just again, just to, I think it needs to be pointed out. Contrast that. There's all this hatred that's directed at Russia, but they're fighting a war right on their own border on territory that's inhabited by Russian speakers, the people who identify strongly with Russia. Yeah, they're not on the other side of the world, trying to overthrow a regime. This is something that clearly concerns them deeply and has, it's a matter of tremendous importance. And for them, it's an existential matter. And we can't say that about Iraq or Iran. Right. Or any of the countries that we, this is kind of a separate issue, but I just thought I needed to bring that up.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the most infuriating things that people say when you hear about us, like, oh, we got to go over to Iraq or Libya or wherever, say we got to fight them over there so we don't fight them here. It's like, how stupid are you? Like that if somebody makes that argument, it's just like, I don't. Are you serious? You're worried that some people in Afghanistan are what are they going to do with their Navy roll over into New York City? It's like,
the Afghanistan Navy, everybody knows about.
But it's in what you're doing though by
I don't
going
think there's
over
a body of water large enough to support any kind of naval vessel in all of Afghanistan.
Right.
But anyway,
but people say that. I hear it on Fox News. We got to fight them over there so we don't fight them over here.
Yeah.
And just to understand, realize that.
Yeah. No, it's a dumb
killing
idea.
all these people over in these other countries, their military government, that's what creates terrorism. That's what creates people that want to come to our country and do some real damage. It doesn't mean that, they do that, now we got to kill more villagers over there. No, you're instantly creating more and more enemies around the world. So just stop. Just stop it. And, this is the scary thing, is that the MIC is such a big machine that it can't stop. Too many people are getting their pockets lined that they just got to keep it going. That's why we have this forever war. So let's see. It's when it's going to have to hit something and come to have a reality check, and we pull these bases back. Let's hope we don't kill a lot more people in the process. That's the only thing I'm worried about. It's better to. It's not a defeat to go back home and take care of your own country and your own people.
Yeah, right. It's actually just a return to normality, or as Pat Buchanan would say, we're a republic, not an empire. Let's stop. Let's give up on the empire dream and go back to being a republic. That's what we started as.
Right. That's America.
Right. That
we
was
were
actually
non-interventionist.
Right. That was the initial American vision. We don't go searching for monsters to slay, to paraphrase Adams.
Right. We need to go back to what America's supposed to be. America got hijacked by the military-industrial complex, by the neoconservative movement. This foreign policy just is destroying us, and we're going along with it, and it felt cool and great at first. After the Cold War, I can see that because you had a pure adversary you could justify it. But anything after the Cold War, it's like, what are we doing?
Right. And then, we had our unipolar moment, the 1990s, basically, where we didn't have any rivals. And so we could really just get away with murder, with invading other countries, and China and Russia weren't strong enough to do anything about it. But that's changed. And as we can see, I think Ukraine was the wake up call. It's just like, again, we were still living in the 1990s, and the Russians kept on warning us. They say, hey, we're serious about this, right? Really, you cannot go into Ukraine. You cannot do that. We're not going to accept that. But we seem to believe that we're still in the 1990s, where we could do whatever the hell we wanted to do, and tough luck. You just have to put up with it. And then we got this war. So that was a huge slap in the face. It could be, if we were more rational, that would have been the time to, open our eyes and say, okay, yeah, we're not in the 1990s anymore. We made a mistake. Let's make a deal and walk away from this. If we'd done that, like back in March or April of 2022, there are a lot of people who would still be alive today that are not.
Right. And U.S. power would be greatly preserved.
Yeah.
If we didn't do these
Europe would
sanctions,
be in much better shape.
Right.
Yeah, but
Right.
we've gone
Yeah.
we've
No.
gone down the wrong. We've taken the ball and we're running the wrong way down the field. We
Right.
just
And it's and trying to point out the reality of what's happening to our country and what's happening to Ukraine and Europe around the world, trying to say that, you get so many people that say, oh, you're Russian propagandist. It's like, no,
yeah
I'm a goddamn American patriot. I want my country to be back to what it's supposed to be,
right
and a republic that takes care of its own people, that doesn't get involved in war. Like when the French helped us out during the American Revolution, and then the French Revolution happened like 15 years later, and they said, "Okay, now it's your turn to help." We're like, "We do not get involved." That was our stance, We didn't. We didn't.
yeah
We were non-interventionists for the longest time, and then we messed up.
yeah
Maybe we can
certainly.
get that back. Maybe we can get that America back after that. Maybe is the silver lining after this is all over. We
Let's
can
hope
get
so.
back to, and that's why I like that America First movement. Is that let's keep that energy going if we can.
Yeah.
The fly in the ointment is Israel, though.
Yeah,
But we won't
yeah.
we won't
Yeah,
pivot there. I was
okay,
going to ask you some questions about the West Bank, but it's already coming up close to an hour, and I
Okay,
gotta
yeah.
have a dinner coming up. But
All right.
maybe on Monday we can. There's a bit of activity in the West Bank that I think would be interesting to cover, so we can save
Sure.
that for Monday. Okay, Dad. We'll stop there then. Okay.
All
have
right.
a good rest of your day
Yeah.
and weekend.
Okay, you
Okay.
too.
Bye bye.
Bye.